How to manage your current year operating budget. This is Trina Martin. I'm with UAN. You've probably watched some other videos or seen other webinars. You've at least heard my voice on the phone support. And I do a lot of training for UAN. I enjoy the training part of the job. Let's get started with, there is additional training. So I have 2 hours to tell you about managing your current year operating budget. But there are some rabbit holes we're going to touch on that we can't go all the way down that rabbit hole and get back up and stay on topic. So there is more in-depth training on our website, uanlink.ohioauditor.gov. If you go to our website, you'll see that training, and then if you click it, you get the drop-down list. And under transition, you will find Phase 2, UAN Prerequisite Accounting Training, and I want to direct you to 103, Chapter 1. And I've just taken a screenshot of the manual that goes with that video, and it is all about changes to the budget. So it's going to go further and slower than I can get through today in a 2-hour video. But you're going to want to refer to this if you want to know more information, particularly about legal level of control, because in those chapters, it goes into great detail about what sets the legal level of control and how you can tell what your legal level of control is, because we're really not going to go into that. You just need to know what your legal level of control is when you're reallocating appropriations. So we do have other training, and I know a lot of our new fiscal officers who might be logged in today. We've got probably 45 to 60 new fiscal officers since October. If a week goes by that we don't have at least 2, and more often 5 new fiscal officers, it's an odd week now. And that used to be a rare occurrence, and now it is just commonplace. The job is difficult to learn, and a lot of people just don't stick with it because it's hard to learn the job. But once you get a year under your belt, things will smooth out. So if you can hang on for the first year and get through it, the second year is a little easier, and then it gets better after that. So remember, we do have more training on our website. I'll refer to this more than once because I don't want to leave you hanging, but we would be here for 6 hours if I got to teach you everything I wanted to teach you about operating the current year in your system. So first, I need to know what group you fall in, because the actual new year budget starts in the year before. And it starts differently for folks who live in counties that do different things. So I'm going to call Group 1 entities that live in a county that still adopt and file a budget. They have, the deadline to file is July. So most people are adopting that in later June or in an early July meeting. And the County Budget Commission reviews your budget and sends it back with an official certificate of estimated resources. So that's the beginning point of the new year budget for folks that file a budget in July. Group 2 are entities in a county that have abandoned the budget procedure and established their own process for issuing the official certificate of estimated resources. And I know some of you know that you live in those counties. And then we have Group 3 in the audience, and that is made up of people that I have no idea about this. This is the first time I've heard of it, and I don't know which way my county goes. So it's by county. It's not, UAN doesn't keep track of what counties are doing this. So I actually have a poll. I'm going to send you out a poll that for you to answer. And on your screen, you should see the poll is open. And I want you just to select which group you're in, because I'm pretty sure we're going to have some folks that don't know what they do. And of course, I can't answer the question what your county does. I just need to know if you know or don't know. I want to make sure you understand that I've given these names of Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3. If you call your county and say, what group am I in, they're not going to understand what you mean. You'll need to talk about, do we file a tax budget, or what is our alternate process? Okay, looks like everybody's finished clicking. Attendees are viewing the poll results. You can see 71% of our audience knows they have to file a tax budget. They're probably already working on it. 20% know that they live in counties that opted out of the budget filing and they have separate procedures, and 9% of our audience don't know which county they're in. So very good. All right, so what does that mean for you folks that don't know? It means you've got to call your county auditor's office, because if you have to file a budget, you got to get that going. So it's, I say in June, but the actual deadline to adopt is like the I think the 15th of July, and it has to be filed with the county. And if you only get one meeting a month, you're probably going to be scrambling to get this done. So I always got that adopted in June, simply because if at the June meeting we didn't get a quorum because, well, we're in the middle of a pandemic and that's been happening, then you're going to have to reschedule the budget hearing, and you don't always get additional time. So target that as early as you can, but the actual filing and adoption of that has later deadlines. I'm just kind of squirrely about, oh my gosh, get this in front of the board and adopted before we run out of time. So call your county auditor's office to find out if you have to file a budget, and if not, what procedures do they follow, because you're going to need to know that. So here's the process when Group 1 files a budget, right? So let's think of the word budget meaning a plan for the new year. And it's not a fuzzy plan. It needs to be a fairly good plan, because if you go fuzzy, it's going to be difficult for you in the new year. So do your best. The budget plan includes A, estimated year-end fund balances. Yes. In May and June, you are going to have to figure out what you think you will end the year with in each fund. Yes, it's an estimate. And then estimated revenue for the new year, which is easier because we receive X, Y, Z pretty much every single year. Now, if you're new, that's going to be more difficult, and we'll talk about that as well. And then C, those that file a budget have to come up with estimated expenditure requirements. So they're not appropriations. They're just estimated expenditure requirements for the new year. Now, what happens to that when you file it is it triggers the official certificate of estimated resources. So I know a lot of people that did not know this, that file 2 copies with the county auditor, and then 1 copy comes back to you, and it contains a document called the official certificate of estimated resources, and it's going to limit the amount you can appropriate in the new year until you get your first amended certificate. And a lot of people think, well, I never knew that. Yes, it does. It actually limits that. But C, the estimated expenditure requirements do not become board adopted appropriations. It's the estimated expenditure requirements. It's going to be the starting point for your permanent appropriations, because you've found out what you're going to need, but those will be evaluated and have to be actually adopted as appropriations before they become it. The most important portion of that is you are going to get the official certificate that limits the amount your board's going to be able to appropriate. So what about Group 2, the folks that have opted out, the county opted out of the budget? So they have independent procedures in order to get you an official certificate, because it's their job to certify the maximum you can appropriate. So they probably are going to require you to estimate your year-end fund balances. Again, you don't get out of that. I think we will end the year with this amount, and estimated revenue for the new year. But they usually will have their own form that you can get from their website, or they'll email it to you. So if you're in a group, at Group 3, folks that don't know which group they're in, if you contact your county auditor and they say, we don't do the budget process anymore, we do blah, 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 you need to find out, is there a form I have to fill out, and what are the deadlines? Because UAN does not know that by county. We can't really help you with that. That is something you're going to do off the software. Now, you could use the budget module and simply not fill any expenditures, and that would do the trick. But you need to know what your deadlines are and what form they need to complete. All right, again, A and B. is going to get you your official certificate. It's issued by your county, and it's going to limit the amount you can adopt as appropriations in the new year before you get your first amended certificate. So now you can see why it's called an amended certificate, because the official certificate starts with estimated year-end fund balances, and the amended certificate brings it up to date in the new year. I'm looking at some of the questions. So the official certificate is generated from the process your county uses, whether you file a budget or an alternate document, and you're going to have to call your county. So then what happens to the budget, that plan that you worked so hard on? Nothing. It was a plan. So you don't just start January and you put that on the table in front of the board and say, we adopt the budget, because that was a plan. The plan doesn't automatically become the new year operating budget. And no, it wasn't a waste of time to prepare a budget 6 months before year end. It is a very good idea. Now think about it, folks. You guys are now a government entity. You are the government in some people's eyes. Don't you think it's wise that the government should sit down and think about what they're going to do next year? We think we will get this much money, and then we think we'll do this in expenditures. So yes, it is a very good idea to prepare a budget because, well, we do expect that of our government. The new year operating budget, as we come around to the new year, it becomes two separate components. It's no longer one document that was filed with the county, the budget. It now is two pieces. The certified resources available to appropriate, starting with your official certificate, and board-adopted appropriations, but only when they're adopted as appropriations. So the actual budget you filed doesn't contain board-adopted appropriations. It's a board-adopted plan for expenditures next year. So in the new year, and we'll talk about preparing those appropriations, so you do see that these are two separate components, and each one, as it becomes the new year operating budget, have to be maintained independently. Now, figures from the budget are used to implement the plan, so that it's not a waste of time, but you do have to understand the difference between here's the plan, now we're implementing it. So we start with these two components of the new year operating budget. What happens? So I get my official certificate back from my county, whether I'm in Group 1 that filed the tax budget or Group 2 that later in the year filed some alternative document that your county wants you to fill out that generates the official certificate. Both groups have an official certificate, and that is going to limit the amount your board may adopt as appropriations. Let me show you what that looks like. Now this is just the blank certificate that UAN software has in the budget module, and usually this is sent with the budget when you file it. All of your funds would be listed in this column on the left, and the unencumbered fund balance, this column, is that number that you guessed at. I think we will end this year with this much money in each fund. So this number is generated by you. These two columns, property tax and other sources, the county has looked at your estimated revenue, split them into two categories, property tax and other sources, and certified them. Now what you need to do when you get this document back is look at it, because your county has the authority to tweak your certified numbers. So if you inflated your tax revenue, they will probably reduce it on your certificate. So when you get this document back from the county in August, end of August, September, October, you need to go back to the document you filed, whether it's a budget or an alternative document, and look at what you estimated as revenue and see if the county certified your revenue or whether they tweaked your number. So if you added together the property tax and other sources, it should be equal to what you estimated. If it's not, you need to change your numbers to match theirs, because they have the authority to issue this official certificate. Now, I don't think they're going to play with your other sources number, except the local government distribution is in the other sources column. I think there's a few counties out there that have 3 inside columns, one of which is the local government distribution. So you may see 3 inside columns that add up to your budgets. But the county is the one that distributes the local government, and they could tweak that number as well. So if you get this back and the county did not certify your numbers and you can't tell what they tweaked, you're going to have to call them to find out. And the total column, of course, is going to be my estimated year-end fund balance plus taxes and other sources, giving me the total amount my board is allowed to appropriate in the new year. Okay? So they have the authority to tweak your numbers. And I know that there are some counties that if you estimated your tax revenue too low, they're going to bring it right up to the exact tax base. And there are other counties, if you estimated it based on the entire tax base, they're going to lower it because that county thinks, well, nobody ever pays 100% of taxes. There are people that won't pay their taxes. So it just depends on your county's procedures, what this is going to look like. But when you get this back, that is the time to sit down and look. Did the county certify your estimated revenue? Because we get lots of calls in January from people that say, what do I use for revenue budgets? Where do I get those numbers? Well, look at your official certificate and see what your county certified. All right, so that's step 1 of the new year operating budget. It happens months before the end of year that you are limited by what you can appropriate. So you know them long before year end. If you look ahead of time, you'll be ready. Now, what happens then to the other side of the 2 components? The other side is appropriations, and usually the first item in the new year for appropriations is a board-adopted temporary appropriations. So they're adopted usually in December to take effect January 1st. They have nothing to do with this year's appropriations. They are the first appropriations in the new year, and they are issued because some of our fiscal officers have a very early January meeting where they're going to have to pay bills, and some people have a very early January payroll. Folks that have biweekly pay, sometimes that January payday is January 2nd. So without temporary appropriations, they're not going to be able to post payments or wages in the new year. So temporary appropriations get them through that. Now, I do want to talk to some of you seasoned veterans out there that have been mentoring new fiscal officers, and I think that's wonderful that you're teaching them. But we got so many calls in January from fiscal officers who said they were trained by somebody that knew what they were doing, whether the former fiscal officer or a neighboring fiscal officer, and who told them, oh, I never do temporary appropriations. And then this fiscal officer calls on January 3rd and said, I have payroll today, and the software won't let me do it because I was told not to have my board adopt temporary appropriations. So folks, when you are mentoring a newbie, please train them based on what they need. So if you don't have an early meeting and you always work 3 16-hour days, December 31st, January 1st, January 2nd, to close the year and start the new year, that's wonderful if that's what you want in your life, because the software would let you have an easier path. You need to make sure whether they have a payroll early in January, they're going to need temporary appropriations. And I know I had one fiscal officer tell me that she tells her employees that they can't get paid in January because until she closes the year. Now that's not true. The software would have allowed her to open temporary mode and put in temporary appropriations, and you can keep payroll going without skipping a beat. She chose not to, but then she misinformed the employees. So make sure you're training people based on their needs for getting payroll out on time. Everybody needs their paycheck, and keeping bills paid on schedule as required. So many of our entities use temporary appropriations, and in early December with the UAN year-end release. So if you're new this year and you haven't been through a year-end, we are going to give you the version update that gives you the new year. You open temporary mode in December to get early access to the new year. And what's the point of that? Well, that means your new year can have the revenue budgets entered because you already know what is certified on your official certificate. And if your board adopted temporary appropriations, you put those temporary appropriations in the new year and you're ready to hit the ground running. So that's the beginning point of the new year operating budget. It usually starts with new year. Now, don't be sending me messages that say we don't adopt temporary appropriation because this and that, because I'm not reading those out loud. If entities have an early meeting or an early payroll, then temporary appropriations are probably going to be necessary. Not everybody wants to work 16-hour days, 3 days in a row, so they don't have to use temporary mode. Why would be the point of not using something so extraordinarily convenient? Okay, so this is right where we are at the beginning of the year. So January rolls over, we've got these things in place. What happens next? Well, when you close the prior year, you are going to complete a form called the Certificate of the Total Amount from all sources available for expenditures and balances. That is the name of that document. In UAN, it's called the UAN Year-End Balance Certificate. I'll give you a peek at that. Let's bump it up. Okay, page 1 of the Certificate of the Total Amount, blah, blah, blah. It shows all the funds grouped and totaled together by type. So you can see it says special revenue funds, but I have a lot of special revenue funds. So page 1 is just where the totals are brought forward. If we go down to page 2, we can see the individual funds and then the total for that fund type. And I've got some samples in here, and we're going to go over this carefully. So now you can see under special revenue funds, all of my funds are listed. Now you can see them. Individual funds, and then they're totaled, and then the total amount for each fund type goes to page 1. So let's talk about what this is. So remember, your official certificate you got back by filing a budget or alternative documents. You got the official certificate, but that first column, the unencumbered fund balance, is estimated figures. Once you close the prior year, you're telling the county auditor, these are my exact closing figures, and these columns from this one over to here are bringing that number up to date into a real unencumbered fund balance. So let's look at these. So this is your actual cash balance as of December 31st and January 1st. It's the same number. Every single one of these funds closed with this figure. So I'm telling them this is the real fund balance, but there are things that adjust it. That's why it's called the unencumbered fund balance, because this is simply the fund balance. If you had carryover encumbrances, they would be listed in this column. So what is a carryover encumbrance? Well, for the most part, an item has a purchase order in the prior year. Let's say in December you go out and buy 16 widgets. You order them online and you're going to be invoiced for them. So you have the purchase order in December. The items arrive before the end of December, but the bill is not going to be paid until January because it did not come in time for regular scheduled payments. So it is carried over, and it reduces the cash balance available to appropriate in the new year because it's going to be spent off of last year's appropriations. So the cash will be the new year cash, but the appropriation is from the prior year. Also in this column is any unpaid employee withholdings, let's say for December or the fourth quarter, that are going to be paid in January. A lot of times, if you have biweekly payroll, your last December ending pay period is paid in January. Therefore, you can't do the OPRS report and payment until the new year. A lot of people pay their taxes the first of the next month, and those would carry over as well. The non-spendable balance column represents money that is not spendable. So my example of non-spendable balance is 2 private purpose trust funds we have. And I know a lot of townships with cemeteries have cemetery bequest funds. A lot of libraries have endowment funds, and they have a donated amount that is non-spendable, which means it is not available to appropriate. So this column represents the non-spendable portion that we have to invest, and then the interest is spendable. So this gets subtracted. It's not spendable, therefore it is not going to be resources available for appropriation. Now we do have some clients that have reserve balance account, but it's a low percentage, and I'm not sure anybody in this room has them. So it would also be a column that adjusted the unencumbered fund balance, and we're not going to talk about that in depth because we've got a lot of things to cover that I know you need to know. Advances not repaid. So I'm first going to have to explain what an advance is. An advance is a loan of cash from the general fund most of the time to a fund that has sufficient appropriations but not enough cash to pay the bill. And last year, let me set up a scenario for you. Last year, we did a huge amount of paving, and it was paid for from the gasoline tax fund in July. Now, the gasoline tax fund is one of those funds that gets a receipt once a month. And in July, we had only received 6 months of revenue by the time we had to pay for that paving. And our appropriations, and therefore our purchase order, is based on a whole year of appropriations, which is based on resources available, which is all of your 100% of your whole year of revenue. And so we did not have the cash available to pay the bill, but we had sufficient appropriations, and before year end we would have enough cash. But we did not repay this $50,000 loan to the general fund back before year end. Now, I want you to look at that. We had $195,000. We could have easily repaid that advance, but we forgot because nothing pops up and reminds you, don't forget about that advance you forgot to repay. But we get a lot of calls in January when people create their year-end balance certificate and they say, oh, we didn't repay this advance. We could have, but we didn't, and the year's already closed. Well, December's passed. You are supposed to pay these back within 12 months. You have 1 year to repay these loans. So we're not out of compliance, but it does adjust both funds. It shows that the gasoline tax has to pay this back, and it's cash, so it's coming out of the carryover fund balance. It's reducing it because I can't appropriate this money, and it shows the general fund is a positive. So you can see it's adjusting both. Advances not repaid, the total is always going to net to zero because one is paying it back and the other is receiving it. You can't have part of that. So it's all, this is going to adjust both of these resources available. Now all of these combined give me my unencumbered fund balance. Now, wouldn't it be lovely if this document's columns were named exactly like your official and your amended certificate? No kidding, because it causes so much confusion. So this column, let me get all the highlights off the other ones. This column becomes your unencumbered fund balance because you're giving the county auditor exact figures to replace the estimated year-end fund balance. It takes all of these columns to get there. Now, if you're at a small entity and you don't have any carryover encumbrance, non-spendable balances, or unpaid advances, your cash balance column is going to be the same as your carryover balances available for appropriation. So this becomes your unencumbered fund balance. the first column of numbers on your amended certificate. So this document is going to give the county the numbers they need. Now this column, once again, wouldn't it be nice if they labeled these the same, but they didn't. This is your estimated revenue for the new year. So remember, you either filed a budget that included your revenue estimates, or you filed an alternate document that showed estimated revenue for the new year, and you got back an official certificate from the county that says, this is how much we're certifying. And a lot of times it is exactly the same. So it goes in one column. It doesn't look on here as two things, taxes and other sources. It's in one column. So this is your estimated revenue, and this is where you would get out your revenue budgets that you already know from your official certificate. The UAN software is going to automatically pull those revenue budgets that you've put in the new year into this document, and that gives you the total amount you are going to be permitted to appropriate. Now, let me point out something. Some of you guys have already looked at this while I was talking. In July of last year, we had not applied for the American Rescue Plan grant. After the budget was filed, we got the grant, and it's not included on my official certificate because it wasn't an existing fund. So the county did not have the American Rescue Plan on my official certificate, and now I'm telling them this is the cash balance of all my funds. I have to include this fund because it did carry over with cash. But some counties will not let you add a new revenue budget. I wish those highlights would go where I want. So in some of these, some of you are saying to yourselves, well, my county wouldn't let me certify that until we get it later. And that's, so some of you will have the fund here in the carryover column, but you don't have the revenue yet, because your county might make you wait until you get it to get an amended certificate. So that's a difference between counties. Some counties let you include, when you send this document, you go ahead and put it in when you send this document, and you include a cover letter that says, oh, by the way, we did apply for the American Rescue Plan, and we will receive our second tranche around August in the amount of XYZ. And some counties will certify it, others won't. So you need to know whether your county is going to let you change the figures for estimated revenue when something new happens. So this is the document you send off to the county auditor, and they're going to review it and send you back the amended official certificate of estimated resources. So now it becomes the amended. It's going to certify those year-end fund balances, carryover encumbrances, and estimated revenue. And now you get the amended official certificate of estimated resources, which we all call the amended certificate. So now you can see why it starts out as an official certificate and then becomes the amended certificate, because that first amended certificate brings the estimated year-end balances into true figures. All right, so once you receive your amended certificate, most entities then adopt permanent appropriations. That's just usually the way it gets. You wait to see what they're certifying, and then you adopt based on their certification. Because remember, the county can tweak your numbers. They have the power to do that. And this is probably where we're all sitting right now. Some of you may have had new things happen that you've had to get an amended certificate already. But most people are sitting right here with one amended certificate and their permanent appropriations adopted. So once you adopt permanent appropriations, of course, you enter them in your software. Now, what happens when your budget changes? Before we move forward with that, let me take a look at the questions and see if I can answer some of these. Okay, somebody wants to know, what do they call it if it's an alternate budget? I don't know what your county calls it, and I think they're all different. You would have to call your county auditor to find out what they call it and what documents they use. Here's a good one. Does your certificate of estimated resources have to match exactly what you use for temporary and permanent appropriations? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So your official certificate and your amended certificate set the maximum amount your board can adopt, but it doesn't mean you have to adopt 100% of your resources available. Very good question. What UAN report does group, you didn't give me your group number. I don't know what the UAN budget software, which is the budget module, so you see accounting, payroll, budget, that's the module that actually does the full budget that you file with your county. So if you're in a county that files the budget, you can use the budget module for that. If you are in a county that requires only estimated year-end fund balances and only estimated revenue, it's not really a report in UAN you could use. You could still use the budget software to create those figures, but your county probably has a form for you to fill out. I've already answered the question of if my county abandoned the budget process, what do we do? Well, call your county and find out, because you will have a deadline to complete a form. And so you need to know two things. Will they email you the form and you keep it on your computer and fill it out every year, or can you download it from their website? Where in the UAN is the form certificate of the County Budget Commission? That's in the budget software. If you go to the budget module and go to reports, you will see listed there. When is it appropriate to go directly to permanent appropriations? You are limited by your certificate in place. So if you want to adopt permanent appropriations before you get your first amended certificate, you're limited by the official certificate. So it isn't a matter of when it's appropriate to adopt them. It's about if you have to pay bills in January, you're probably going to need temporary appropriations. The report in UAN that we just went to, that year-end balance certificate, that is in, you go to the budget module, transactions, and you'll see year-end balance certificate. So the UAN software prepares that for the new year every year. Now that we have our budget in place, so again, I'm using the word budget, but it really is two separate components. My certified resources available, we are allowed to appropriate, and my board adopted appropriations. Two separate components now that we're operating in the current year. So we want to use an example. So we just received a $5,000 fire equipment grant. This is an example I want to use because grants don't just pop in without somebody applying for it. So I'm going to give you a good scenario. Last year, our fire chief came to the meeting, got on the agenda like he was supposed to. We don't have a rebel here. He came to the meeting and he presented to the governing board an opportunity for an equipment grant for $5,000. And we would need to commit $1,000 matching share of our own money to that. And the governing board liked the idea. They are approved of the grant. They did whatever legislative activity was required. So the application was approved by the governing board. This isn't somebody who applied for a grant without the knowledge of the board. So here's what I did in fake Buckeye Township in my head. Last year, when the chief got approval for that, there is a form in that grant application that the fiscal officer had to sign to commit $1,000 if we get the grant. Now there's a lot of competitions for these grants. So I didn't have to do anything in last year's budget because we simply filed an application. But I made a note that my permanent appropriations were going to include $1,000 which we would contribute to this project because I certified that as fiscal officer I would hold this money to be used if we get the grant. So it is, the $1,000 is already appropriated, but the $5,000 grant we might not get. So the grant is not certified on my amended certificate as estimated revenue, and it is not included in my appropriations because we might not get it, right? We just got our award letter, and the board knows we've gotten the grant. there isn't any question it's going to be accepted. Last year, when I filed that, when that application for a grant got filed, I called local government services and asked them, do I have to run this through a capital project fund, or can it run right through the fire fund? And with the details I gave them of the grant and what was purchased, they said, you can run that right through the fire fund. That does not mean you can. In my example, I can. And then I asked him what revenue code I would be using for a local grant. It's not a government grant. This is a local company that gives these grants out. So that's not normal. We don't get money like that. So what revenue code would I use? And of course, appropriation account would be capital outlay, but they confirmed that for me. So I knew last year when we applied for the grant, I made notes in the file. I called local government services and they told me, if we get this grant, this is what I use. So when the chief called and said, I got a letter today, and he faxes over a copy of that, I have a copy of the award letter. I know what I'm doing in my budget. I know what fund it's running through. We get calls all the time on the UAN support line from folks that say, I got a grant 3 months ago. I don't know what account code to use. Well, have you called local government services? No. 3 months ago, you got a grant and you have not posted the receipt. And you haven't even called local government services to find out what fund, revenue, and appropriation account to use. You have to stay in front of these things rather than behind. So I know that the pandemic has made things a whole lot harder to stay in front of. Those of you that have ARP grants, you're running around with your hair on fire all the time, but you need to stay in front of these things to lower the stress level. So when the application is going through, that's when you need to figure out, where would I put this? And then you've already got it. So I know that I'm going to need to change both components of my current year operating budget, because I have to certify the grant revenue and we have to appropriate for spending and purchase order, right? Okay, so I'm going to have to refer you to the UAN New Money Quick Guide. So some of you have gotten this New Money Quick Guide in an email because you've called sometime. I think I typed this document up because we had so many people calling with the CARES Act fund. I mean, this started back in 2020. I got a new fund. What do I do? Well, you have to look at the New Money Quick Guide, because we had so many, I typed it up. Some of you have this, and others, you're seeing it for the first time. And it's just simply notes and what order you have to do. So the New Money Quick Guide, I've tidied it up a bit, but the content is pretty much the same. It is referring to revenue you're getting that is not certified on your current amended certificate, and it's not appropriated yet. So it's new money. It could be a grant. It could be all kinds of things. Somebody made a $10,000 donation. It's money you don't have certified yet. It is especially important for township fiscal officers to certify significant amounts of money on their amended certificate, because your wages are based on that. Now, nobody else's wages are based on that tax, but on your amended certificate. But townships, you have to look at that. So we have gotten so many calls over the last couple of years. Audit found that all the elected officials were underpaid because the fiscal officer did not get an amended certificate because they weren't going to use the money, blah, 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 lots of little reasons. And now they're doing all kinds of retro pay. So we're not talking about that in depth today. But when you are a township, it is extremely important your certification of new revenue is done timely. And then every time you get an amended certificate, you have to check the elected official's pay scale to see if that bumped you up into the new pay scale. And a lot of times these grants might bump you up into the next pay scale, but the fact is your funds that are not getting any money and to pay the elected officials' wages cannot afford the raise. So it's up to you to make sure you get the amended certificate and you inform your governing board that now that we are eligible for a raise, we can't pay for it. What are we going to do? So again, that's not a UAN question, but it is a very good question that your board would have to decide what to do about. So when you receive money that's not budgeted at the beginning of the year, there are several steps that have to be followed to make it available to spend. So we get lots of calls. I deposited and posted a receipt for this grant. Why isn't it in my appropriations? Well, because You haven't done anything with your budget. All you did was post a receipt that increased the cash balance, but you didn't touch the budget components. So step one, we're talking about structure, A, B, and C. So if you contact local government services and they tell you it could run through an existing fund, you're going to skip A because that is about adding a new fund. So if they tell you you have to add a new fund, in our case it would be something like miscellaneous capital projects, I want to make sure you understand that on the drop-down list for the fund type, you'll get a vague name like miscellaneous capital projects, but you need to type over that with a real name. The auditor's office doesn't expect you to have 16 miscellaneous capital project funds because you'll lose track of what they are. And I've seen several entities that have miscellaneous special revenue funds, but they don't know what they are because when they came in as fiscal officer, none of the governing board knew what those funds were. They'd been around for years with very little money left in them. No one knows what they are. So when you're adding a new fund, once you select the correct fund type, highlight over and type the real name of the fund that it's going to be at your entity. Like example, if we were doing a big park improvement project and we were supposed to be opening a capital project fund, I would name it 2022 Park Improvement Fund. And then there's no question, if anything happens to me, I win the lottery and I leave, the next person's going to know what that is. So once you figure out the fund, you're going to look at the revenue account. What revenue account do you post this new money to? Local government services will help you with that. It's always a good idea to have the chart of accounts open when you call them because sometimes they say, oh, use intergovernmental. There's 16 account codes in intergovernmental. Which one? So if you're looking at the chart of accounts, then they say intergovernmental, say, okay, hang on, I'm looking at intergovernmental, which account code? Pin them down, but you need to be looking at it in order to know you're going to pin it down because we get people calling all the time and said, I called LGS, they told me intergovernmental. Okay, which one? Again. And if you don't know what appropriation account to use and they told you which one to use, you're going to add the appropriation account. So you want to get your structure in place first because you can't post a receipt without a revenue code and you can't put in appropriations without an appropriation account, right? So structure is very important first. And then you always want to make sure you get that new money deposited. So some folks, let's say they got the money last Tuesday and they're waiting for a response back from LGS. Now, if there's no question you're accepting the grant, deposit the money. If there is any question whether the check you're receiving is something that's going to be accepted, you want to talk to your legal advisor and it's going to go before the governing board. But you have a requirement to deposit money on a timely basis. So in UAN, you can always backdate the receipt to where it belongs. Receipts can be backdated. Sometimes you're waiting a couple of days, but don't leave the check sitting on your desk. If it's yours, deposit it. And then when you find out the revenue code and you add it, you can backdate the receipt where it belongs. If the new money is not already certified on your amended certificate, you're going to be requesting a new amended certificate from your county, whatever procedures they require. So some counties have a form you fill out. Other counties just want you to send a fax or something that just an email that describes the difference. Sometimes they want reports. Sometimes they want proof. We'll talk about that later. And then you're going to put in a revenue budget, right? A supplemental revenue budget for that new money. So it has to be incorporated into that first component of your operating budget. I am increasing my amount the board can appropriate by requesting an amended certificate. And then, of course, once you get that amended certificate, the board at their next meeting can adopt appropriations for that, supplemental appropriations. And you enter those in UAN. So the New Money Quick Guide just lays out the steps. It doesn't really do anything except remind you, oh, I need to get an amended certificate. I need to put in a revenue budget. My board has to adopt appropriations. I have to put in an appropriation budget. And then I can do a purchase order and we can spend the money. Okay, so that New Money Quick Guide, again, it's on your handouts panel. If you can't get that to work, then this is a recorded video. It'll be on our website, hopefully in about 2 weeks, because I have another webinar next week, and then I'll get both of them posted, and those documents will be, both the slides and the New Money Quick Guide will be there. So you have to do these things in order, so let's talk about that. I have to add the structure in place, and to do that I would go to accounting, maintenance, fund first, revenue account second, appropriation accounts third, right? Fund, revenue, appropriation accounts. So I have to put the structure in place. So I got the grant. We know we got the award letter. I went ahead and added the revenue account. I already had the fund and I already had the appropriation account. So I only had to add one thing to my structure. Sometimes you have to add all three. And now I'm going to change my resources available because I have to request an amended certificate. Okay, so let's take a look at my sample letter. So I'm old school, so I type letters, right? So it could be that your county has a form they want you to fill out. You could fill that out and then save it and email it to them. Some of you type a letter, sign it, and fax it with some documentation, but this is just my sample. It's on letterhead. It's a date. It's dated today to my county auditor, and this is the basics. We've been awarded a $5,000 equipment grant for the fire levy fund, and if you have more than one fire levy fund, you probably ought to identify it by number. I know entities that have more than one levy in separate funds because the use of the money is restricted. And I'm asking to issue an amended certificate, increase our other sources revenue in the fire levy fund by $5,000. Now there's no question, this is not taxes. This is not changing my unencumbered fund balances. This is new money to be certified in other sources on the fire levy fund. And this next paragraph could go both ways. Some counties want you to put in the supplemental revenue budget and send them the reports to show what the new numbers will be, and other counties just want you to request it and send like the award letter proving what it is, and when you get the amended certificate back, you put in the budget. So I'm just showing one example. It doesn't mean that's the way your county wants. So my county, and if you're in Franklin County, I didn't call Franklin County. I'm in fake Franklin County in the cloud of Trina's imagination. So I did not call real Franklin County and ask them their procedures, because that would give you an advantage over everybody else in the class, and we just can't have that, can we? So I have added my 5,000 revenue budget, and I'm enclosing a new resources available. Some counties want that to show it's already done. A revenue budget report, not likely, but maybe, and a copy of the grant award letter for your files. There are counties that require that you prove that you're going to get the money by something like the grant award letter. So you can't just send an email that says, I need an amended certificate for $5,000 to the fire fund in that county. You got to send proof. So some counties are very lax. You send them the email that says, give me this, they'll give it to you. And others want more documentation. So I've kind of given you an example of the far end of that, and you can back it down to what your county requires. It's really simple. I signed a letter, I faxed it over, and with those documentations. So how do I do these things, and where do I get these reports, right? So whether you put the revenue budget in when you're requesting, or whether you put the revenue budget in after you receive it, the software will let you do that either way. All right, so to get my reports, I'm going to put in my revenue budget, like I said, accounting, maintenance, revenue budgets. I'm going to select that fund, that's my fire, and click supplemental, because this is in addition to what we currently have certified on the amended certificate. And you see my account code is already there. It's a local grant, not from a government. And LGS told me which account to use. So I'm going to fill that in. It's $5,000. I typed a purpose in that purpose box, but it's not required. You can make notes if you want to. My effective date, because my county wants it in when I request it, my effective date is the date I'm requesting. For those of you who wait until they get the amended certificate back, your effective date is going to be the date on the amended certificate. Don't think anybody requires a resolution for this, but I have talked to fiscal officers that say they get a resolution from the board before requesting an amended certificate. So if you have a resolution number, you could type that in, but the software doesn't require it, so you can skip that even if you have one. And then you're simply going to get save and close, and that has increased it in your software. Now, when that amended certificate comes back, I'm going to check it as well. So the other report I said was that resources available, and we're going to look at this a lot today. Hardly anybody uses this report. Every time I've got someone on the phone and I said, well, let's go to budgetary reports, it's like, oh, I never looked at that before. The budgetary reports and resources available for appropriation should match your amended certificate. So you just select all your funds. If you're going to fax it, you'd print it. I would normally print one for my amended certificate file anyway. If you're going to email it, you would save it as PDF. So you can attach it to an email. And then my revenue budget report. I mean, that's kind of out there. I'm not sure any county asks for the revenue budget report. But just in case, revenue reports, and everybody's familiar with revenue status, but I want you to look on that drop-down list. If you click the drop-down list, you can get the revenue budget report, which just shows budget. It doesn't show how much you've received this year or anything else. It really is just the budget for the revenue. And select all your funds, account codes in that list, print it or save as PDF, whichever you require, and I can attach those to the email. So now I want to talk about all we've done so far is get an amended certificate and put in our revenue budget. We have managed only one component of our operating budget. We can't spend the money yet. It hasn't been appropriated. But I want to stop here and talk to folks about the amended certificate portion. Does the board have to approve a supplemental revenue budget report? Well, that's a very good question. In all my years as fiscal officer, I never had an approval to get an amended certificate because everything I looked at in the village officer's handbook and the township handbook later says that the fiscal officer is supposed to timely certify revenue. Unless it's about a grant that the board isn't going to get, they're not going to accept it. So like I said, I used that example to make sure you understood that my governing board was fully informed about this grant application. They approved it when it was applied for. We do hear from clients that say somebody applied for a grant and committed $25,000 as a local match, and we don't have that kind of money, and there is no way the governing board is going to accept that grant. You are supposed to be certifying additional revenue, but I have talked to fiscal officers that say that they get that approved by the board first, because I always got the amended certificate and then advised the board at the next meeting. So you might want to, talk to your legal advisor, but I never once got board approval to get an amended certificate. If there was anything questionable, of course I would wait till we got to the meeting, like a grant that they didn't even know about. I would wait to get the amended certificate. That was a very good question. Okay, so does a new fund need to be approved by the governing board? Well, that's a whole different subject that we're not covering today. So while it's a good question, that would be the question you get LGS on the phone and ask. And I know that there are auditors who look for a piece of legislation that set up a fund if it's a conditional interest type fund. So, here's a good question. I got a letter from the county auditor stating that we received $17,000 less due to a clerical error. We will be receiving this in May. Do I need an amended certificate to receive this additional PLF? Good question for local government services. So the first thing I would say is it was last year's PLF. They made a clerical error. So while you're receiving the money this year, if you post it to the same account code, and it's possible that's where local government services would want you to do, then forever it would look like this year's revenue was highly inflated. It would look like an error. So I think that I would want to ask local government services if this revenue that is for what they didn't pay us and they should have last year should be posted to the same account. Often the answer is yes, that it is. And should I get an amended certificate? Well, I think, yes, I would get an amended certificate because you got money. This is new money. It was not budgeted. You didn't know you were going to get it until now. I would request an amended certificate because that's going to increase the amount your board can appropriate. It doesn't mean they have to, but they could. So yes, I would get the amended certificate, but it doesn't mean they have to change the appropriations. Good questions. Let's move on. We're going to look at the next component of updating the operating budget, because I got my amended certificate back, and at the next meeting, my board is going to adopt the new appropriations for that grant. So remember, appropriations aren't like the amended certificate where you can do it between meetings. Appropriations have to be adopted by the governing board. It's a piece of legislation. And I use the word legislation because in our audience, we get villages as well as townships, libraries, and special districts. And villages usually adopt appropriations as an ordinance, not a resolution. So I use the word legislation to represent either, whether it's an ordinance in villages or villages also do resolutions. Everybody else is doing legislation as a resolution. But it is a piece of paper that gets signed and it's dated. So it is legislation adopted by the governing board. It always has been, still is. And then I'm going to send a copy of that signed legislation to the county auditor. Why? Because this is not a request for an amended certificate, because I am required to notify my county that we just appropriated the $5,000 that he certified on the amended certificate. So think about this. I asked for an amended certificate. That raised the bar. That increased the amount my governing board can appropriate, but it doesn't mean they did. Now I am telling the county that they did appropriate that $5,000. So what does that look like? And of course, I'm going to put in my supplemental appropriation budget as well. So now I'm talking about documenting for the county the adoption of supplemental appropriations. Enclosed find a copy of Resolution 22-37 adopted by the board at last night's meeting, increasing appropriations to the fire levy fund by $5,000. Don't hesitate to call me. So you see, I have to tell the county because the county is going to look at my total appropriations. Now I just appropriate $5,000 more, and they're going to compare that to my amended certificate, and they're going to say, send me back a piece of paper that says you did not over appropriate. Now I know I've talked to people in some counties, their county doesn't send them anything back. So you are required, as far as I know, by every single county, that if you change the total appropriations to a fund like this, I just increased it $5,000, I have to send a copy of the legislation to the county. And they may or may not send something back. Maybe your county only sends back when you have over appropriated your amended certificate, and it tells you, whoops, you have appropriated too much money. And you don't have enough resources to support it. So you can see that when the board adopts the appropriations, I send a copy of that signed piece of legislation to the county. All right. I'm going to enter a supplemental appropriation budget because this is new appropriations. My system has to match what the board adopted. I'm going to check mark my fire fund and click supplemental. Supplemental means changing the total. And it's going to go in the account code for machinery, equipment, and furniture. And you can see I've already got my $1,000 matching share budgeted there. So like I said, when I know we have committed to a project, a matching share, I can go ahead and include the matching share in my permanent appropriations. And then if we don't get the grant, we can move it somewhere else. If we do get the grant, the matching share is where it needs to be. And in this case, I already knew it was going to run through the fire fund. So I'm going to increase my $5,000. I typed a purpose in the box, but you don't have to. And my effective date was the date of the meeting and my resolution number. So of course in training land, the date has moved forward. We're actually sitting on the 13th of the month because that's the way it works in Magic Training Land. But some of you are the fiscal officers and you are putting it in place. So let's say it really is the 10th and I am preparing a resolution to put in front of the board on the 13th. And I want to be able to get that resolution adopted by the board, appropriating the money, and get the purchase order in front of them to sign. To do that, I would have to put the appropriations in, dated the meeting date. Now, I probably would not know the resolution number. I could leave that blank, because the software doesn't require the resolution number to be, I mean, you don't absolutely have to put it in there anyway. So if you're putting it in ahead of time because you know you're putting that resolution in front of you, know they're going to do this, then yes, you can put it in ahead of time. You can't do anything, you can't spend it, and you can't send a resolution to the county until it's actually adopted and signed. But the software is going to let me put that in, dated the meeting date. So I save and close, and then I actually have the appropriations available, and we've got the vendor selected. It's already been talked about, so I get my vendor added, and I get my purchase order in place, and now I have the resolution and the new purchase order to take to my meeting on the 13th. Not going to order this stuff until the appropriations are adopted, so the chief knows he's not touching this until it's finalized by the board. And then the next day I can send that in. So how about any questions about the appropriation section? So somebody else got a fire equipment grant. So let me read what this says. Okay, you're asking me about the board did not pass a resolution about a grant. Those are legal questions. So I don't know the answer to whether or not you should have had a resolution accepting the grant or something like that. That's a legal question. Yeah, again, if you don't know what fund it's supposed to run through and you don't know what revenue code to use, contact local government services. If you're not sure if you have to get permission for that fund to be used, permission from local government services or permission from your governing board, call local government services. So you really do need to know what you have to have. So no, you can't just guess at what fund it has to run through. Call and find out. Does it need its own capital project fund? Will you need board approval for this? These are all things to be asking somebody besides UAN. We can help you with the software. So it is a good question. I'm not saying it's not a good question. It's just one that you're going to have to address to local government services. What fund should the grant run through? You can call your legal advisor. Do I have to have a resolution accepting the grant or committing the funds? These are legal questions, not operating the budget questions. So I can't cross lines because we're UAN and we have to stay in our little tiny cage of software. And I had to have all of the things we're doing reviewed to make sure I haven't stepped across that line. So it's a very good question, but call local government services to see what fund it has to run through. Should you get a resolution adopted to approve that fund? Things like that. So that's the basic changes. I got new revenue, get it certified. Townships especially get it certified on your amended certificate. Whether or not the board appropriates it is a different action altogether. So that's the usual. Let's start talking about the unusual changes that throw people. So the most common unusual changes to your amended certificate is when you have to void a prior year warrant. So you got a check that was mailed out in late November and it still hasn't cleared the bank, and the vendor says, look, we haven't got the payment. I'm going to have to charge you late penalties. So the thing is, it could still be delivered in the mail, but it probably is never going to show up anywhere. And then audit adjustments. These two things, voiding a prior year item, whether it's a warrant or very rarely people void a prior year receipt, or audit adjustments, it's going to change your beginning of year fund balance. It affects the current year's resources available because that's what it does. And every time you do those adjustments, you are changing the current year beginning balances. So how would that require an amended certificate? Well, think about it. Do you remember that certificate of the total amount from all sources available and balances started with your actual December 31st ending fund balances? When you void a prior year warrant, you are changing the beginning of your fund balance because you're putting money back in the fund. It's a positive adjustment. You're putting money back in the fund because that check is never going to clear the bank. It is lost. Audit adjustments could go both ways. Probably some funds are going to be reduced and some funds are going to be increased because a receipt or a payment was posted in the wrong fund. So either type, these are going to require an amended certificate because you're changing that beginning of year fund balance. So let's see what lovely little PDF document I have for you here. So you can see the fund balance I was talking to, that the report resources available for appropriation. This far right column, well, of course, it's not going to highlight only the column I want. This far right column should match the far right column on your amended certificate because they come to the same amount. So each of these give you the unencumbered fund balance, plus, minus, minus, blah, blah, blah. And then this is your revenue budget. This column makes up taxes and other sources. Or if you've got 3 columns, taxes, local government, and other sources. This is one number representing those inside columns on your amended certificate. But that far right column in UAN should match. So let's say you void a prior year warrant and you put money back in your fund. That's changing this number. That the only way the county would know that is if you tell them. So if you void a prior year warrant and you don't tell your county auditor, let's say you get a $10 check that went missing in the mail and you voided a prior year warrant, would you have to request an amended certificate at that moment? That is so insignificant. The next time you request an amended certificate, you could include it. But if it's a $6,000 check, that's a substantial amount of money that you want available. Yes, I would request. So remember that your UAN system, when you void a prior year item or do audit adjustment, it automatically changes this number, which means you have to tell the county what you've done so that they can get the amended certificate to match, because this is only changing the unencumbered fund balance column. Okay? So if you want more information, because now I'm going to get 100 questions, how do I void a prior year warrant, or how do I post audit adjustments? So we do have additional training online under training and accounting. So again, you go to training with a very slow arrow, and then choose accounting, and then you scroll down to the housekeeping section. So under housekeeping, there is a section for payments, and in that payment section, how to void a prior year. And then if you scroll down even further, there's a video that covers audit adjustments in depth. Why? And it takes it from the beginning. My auditor sent me a list, and what do I do with it? It takes you through all the process, and at the end, getting an amended certificate for the changes in fund balances. So we do have these lovely housekeeping videos that have these one subject items. Of course, you can always call UAN, and we'll tell you there's a video, but we usually, if there's not 5 people waiting on hold, we have the time to actually walk you through the whole process. Some people like the video rather than talking on the phone. So let's say I watched that video, or I called UAN. They walked me through the fund balance adjustment report, voiding a prior year warrant. And again, I'm not going to go in depth in that because we could get down bunny trails that I just cannot do in a 2-hour video. I'm already probably going to run out of time before we get through all of this, because I like to jam-pack my webinars with lots of information. So I'm going to send my county auditor something that shows why I'm requesting an amended certificate for a change in beginning year fund balances. So when you post voiding a prior year warrant, it'll say, do you want a report? And it prints a report for you for your records, which is good. But now I have to email my county auditor, and I need a PDF. Well, you can always go to accounting reports and statements, fund balance adjustment reports, and there they are. So what you have to be careful of is fund balance adjustment reports shows all the fund balance adjustments you've done for the year. So you are only going to select, what if you voided 2 prior year warrants in January? They came back in the mail undeliverable and you voided them. You're only going to select the items you haven't told the county about yet. And in my case, I am telling them the only ones that I avoided so far. So some of you are hanging out there with outstanding prior year warrants going back 12 years that you inherited from the former fiscal officer. Well, audit would love you to take care of that before the next audit. That video would be very helpful. So I'm going to select all of these, and then I'll print a copy for my file if I didn't do it already, and then save as PDF if I'm emailing. So I'm get the report, and then I'm going to do a new resources available too. So accounting reports and statements, budgetary reports, and resources available for appropriation, because my county likes that as well. Remember, my county auditor wants to see that. And again, print or save as PDF, whichever you like. Now I want to show you my sample letter. When I have voided a prior year warrant and I'm requesting an amended certificate, this is different than getting a revenue budget than a $5,000 grant, because that $5,000 grant affected my other sources, my current year revenue certification. This is changing my beginning of year fund balance. And I had one client tell me years ago that her county will not change the unencumbered fund balance. But you voided a prior year warrant. You put the money back in a fund. He won't do it. So at least you did request it. That's all I can say. I don't know what I would tell you if your county won't fix this. But I had 2 outstanding checks from a prior year that have not and will not clear the bank. I have voided those prior year checks, increasing the January 1st fund balances in the following funds. And you're saying, wait, Trina, you said there are 2 outstanding checks. Yes, but they were paid from multiple account codes. So one of those checks came from 2 different account codes. So I have to put the money back in the fund. So the gasoline tax fund got $369.79 back from a payment, and the fire levy fund got $1,128. Those 2 together equal 1 payment, but you have to adjust the money back in by fund. And then my other check was directly from the cemetery levy, and I put $57.57 back in the fund. I am requesting an amended certificate to increase these 3 beginning of year unencumbered fund balances by the above amounts. I'm enclosing a fund balance adjustment report and a new resources available for appropriation. Now, this didn't change my appropriations. I voided the prior year warrants. It put the money back in the funds. Now, when I get the amended certificate, I'll go back to my next meeting. I'm going to tell the board we have this much new resources available to appropriate. They may or may not wish to appropriate it. Getting an amended certificate does not automatically change appropriations. It is simply getting an amended certificate. Okay, do we have any questions? I see a question out there. Oh, this is a good one. Very, very good. Somebody has run into they have done an interfund transfer from the general fund to the street fund. That affects the street fund. So if that was not budgeted at the beginning of the year, the revenue budget for transfer in the street fund has to be certified on the amended certificate. Your letter to the county auditor requesting an amended certificate, when you did a transfer of money from the general fund to the street fund and it wasn't budgeted at beginning of year, on the amended certificate, it does not change the general fund because the general fund isn't receiving less money. It's still receiving exactly what it received. A transfer out is an expenditure. So when you're requesting an amended certificate, you've done a transfer between general and street. You are only requesting an amended certificate for the transfer in the street fund. So your letter to the county auditor would say, the governing board approved an interfund transfer from the general fund to the street fund in the amount of $35,000. Please issue an amended certificate to the street fund for the additional revenue transferred in. It didn't change the general fund because the general fund's resources are still exactly what they were. A transfer out is an expenditure. You already have the appropriations available. It doesn't touch the amended certificate. So a lot of people get confused about what they're doing on the amended certificate. So you should not reduce the general fund on the amended certificate. You are only increasing the revenue, the transfer in revenue in the street fund because it wasn't budgeted at the beginning of the year. And then your governing board will be able to appropriate that money. So again, this is why we're having this webinars, because lots and lots of folks get confused what to do with an amended certificate. So if you did not budget a transfer and you make the transfer, it's only the receiving fund that gets an increased amended certificate. All right, very good questions. Now let's talk about changes to appropriations that don't require an amended certificate, because that very early question, does my board have to appropriate 100% of my resources on the amended certificate? No, they don't. And many entities don't appropriate 100%. All right, if permanent appropriations were not adopted at the maximum amount, then later in the year, supplemental appropriations can be adopted without touching your amended certificate. Appropriations within a fund can be reallocated from one account code to another, which don't require an amended certificate. So that's a change in only the appropriation component, has no effect at all on the amended certificate, because reallocating from one account code to another within the same fund doesn't change the total appropriations. And officially, I love this. Every now and then we get a client call in and say, I'm doing an intra-fund transfer, and we hardly ever hear to it referred to by its real name, because it gets confused with interfund transfer, which is moving money between two funds. So intra-fund transfer in UAN, we stick with the word reallocation because it makes better sense. You can reallocate appropriations between account code, but officially it's an intra-fund transfer. Let's make the language of appropriations so difficult nobody can figure it out. Sometimes appropriations has to be reduced instead of increased. It's rare, but it happens with audit adjustments. So you would have to reduce appropriations. Um, let's say you budgeted a grant, $60,000 grant, and you didn't get it. Well, you're going to have to reduce your appropriations by $60,000 and get a reduced amended certificate by $60,000. But remember, reduce those appropriations first. We're talking about changes to appropriations that don't require a new amended certificate, okay? I've got my amended certificate in place. We did not appropriate 100% of that money. And so we're going to evaluate the resources available. So again, I'm going to take you to that budgetary report. I'm going to get people to look at this because it's lovely. I love these reports, and nobody's using them. So on the budgetary reports, of course, the first report you see is resources available for appropriation, but click the drop-down list and choose comparison of budget and appropriated. You're going to love this. So it's automatically marked for the year. Select all your funds and then either print or display, whichever you like the best. And let's take a look at what this lovely report does for us, because it compares. You can see these same familiar columns right here that make up your amended certificate. So all the way to this column that says, I hate it the way this does this, all the way to this column is your unencumbered balance. So if you looked at your amended certificate, now it won't do it at all. If you looked at your amended certificate, this column is your amended certificate. So it's got the prior year carryover encumbrances, non-spendable, advances not repaid, estimated revenue, which is taxes and other sources, and this is the total amended certificate. This is what you have put in the software as board adopted appropriations. So we can tell you haven't gone over. The variance column, variance means the amount of resources available certified on the amended certificate we have not yet appropriated. So this, when you don't appropriate 100%, this is the report you want to go to. So let's just say, for example, in our cemetery fund last year, remember we did the budget last year, we looked at replacing a couple of our mowers. These are big mowers, and we figured we got model numbers and pricing, which won't be good the next year, but at least it's a starting point, right? And what we find now that we're ready to purchase these things is we can't get the model we wanted, and the price has gone up $5,000. And that's the way things are these days, right? Prices went up since last year. So I don't have enough appropriated, but we have a significant amount of money that has not been appropriated yet, my variance. Now, if you have negatives in this column, you have appropriated more than you're allowed. So it could be like one person in the audience who says, I can't get my amended certificate right. this column isn't right yet. So we don't really know if the variance column is accurate. So as long as this column, total estimated resources, matches your amended certificate, and the final appropriation column is everything your board has appropriated so far, your variance column is accurate. And I know I can go to my board and say, we have $32,000 we can't appropriate. However, budget isn't cash, is it? So while I can tell my board we can appropriate up to 32,000 more, the cemetery is a levy. I get the first half tax in this early spring. I don't get the second half tax till September. So I have to also look at my cash because they want to buy the mowers now. So I have to look at my fund status report to see if we actually have the cash, because changing the budget does not put cash in your bank account. And if you are talking about a fund that receives a levy, you're not going to get the second half until later. So the reason I'm bringing that up is anytime you're talking about a purchase, you have to look at appropriations. They are based on a whole year that will be available. In the middle of the year, you don't have all of your receipts for the year yet. You're not going to get some receipts until December. So you have to look at cash and budget. So remember at the beginning I said under training and transition, we have those phase 2 videos, the accounting prerequisite, and 103 has, I think, chapter 2 has a big section on cash management showing you the difference between, and we get these calls all the time, I have a purchase order for $40,000 and I can't pay the bill using that purchase order. Well, the purchase order is not the problem. There's plenty of appropriations. The fund has $2 in it. So it's waiting for the second half taxes. You don't have cash. You don't have all the cash you're going to get this year now. So cash and budget have to be looked at. So highly recommend that prerequisite 103. I believe it's in chapter 2 where you'll see the section on cash management. So it'll help you when you're trying to do a purchase order like that large paving job we were doing in the middle of the year in a fund that gets money every month. You've got to plan your paving around when you will have the money to pay for it, or plan to do an advance and repayment. So I want to point out we do have a variance to appropriate, but I would also be looking at the fund status to see if the cash is in the fund. And let's say the fund has right now $48,000 in it, but we're going to spend $30,000 on mowing. Is that going to leave me enough to operate on until we get the second half taxes? So you have to think of cash management as well as budget, because fund accounting is such a fun ride. Okay, so I can tell my board we can appropriate, and I also have to look at my cash. So how would we do this? Well, I'm going to enter a supplemental budget. So if they told me at the last meeting, check it out and have that ready at the next meeting, right? Sometimes you're doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my appropriation budget, dating it ahead of time for the next meeting because they want this ready to go. And so I can do that. Some of you are finding out at the meeting they want to do a supplemental appropriation. So you're not actually putting in that appropriation budget until after the resolution is adopted because it happened at the meeting. Sometimes you have the opportunity to put it in ahead of time. So I'm going to go to Accounting Maintenance Appropriation Budgets, check mark the cemetery fund, and click Supplemental because this is changing the total appropriations, but still within my resources available on my amended certificate. You got to send a copy of the legislation adopted by the governing board to the county auditor. So it would look like this, and I don't have 16 sample letters. I just have, the basics. It would look like the other one. At last night's meeting, the board adopted resolution number, for supplemental appropriations in the amount of $5,000 to the cemetery fund. You are not requesting an amended certificate. You are informing them your board increased appropriations, but you have not exceeded your resources available. Your appropriations cannot exceed your amended certificate. Okay, Let's talk about reallocation of current appropriations. So remember, that's the intra-fund transfer that nobody says that word because reallocation is less confusing. Within one fund, you're moving the current unencumbered appropriations from one appropriation account to another. And the word unencumbered, absolutely essential, and a lot of people don't look at. Outside your legal level of control is going to require board-adopted legislation approving. And again, legislation is an item adopted at a meeting. It's a piece of paper signed by the board. Your county auditor doesn't want a copy of this. I would say most county auditors are like, oh my gosh, don't send me that, because it doesn't change the total appropriation in the fund. It's just moving it from one account code to the other. And I don't think the county auditors care about that. If it is inside your legal level of control, it doesn't require board-adopted legislation. And that is why at the beginning of this webinar, I said, we're going to hit points where you want me to go down the rabbit hole, but I have 15 minutes left to get through. And we can't go down rabbit holes. So there is a very good section in that video under Training and Transition 103, Chapter 1, and it covers. You can just move that video forward to the section on legal level of control, and the manual that goes with it also has a printed section. So look at that. You need to know whether, and if you say, I don't have time to watch another video, then just get board-adopted legislation for each reallocation, because that can't hurt. If you don't know what your legal level of control is, that's the safest until you find out. If you know you need a resolution and you don't get one, you're going to get cited, maybe. So why would you reallocate? Well, cost paid from an appropriation account of increase. Is anybody running out of operating supplies for fuel yet? Because man, the gas prices are crazy. And if you're trying to keep a fleet of vehicles on the road like police or fire, EMS, that's a chunk of money. And even if you budgeted high, it's getting higher. So when you are budgeting this year, when you're actually doing that budget, for those of you that have to file a budget soon, please budget heating and fuel and heat and electricity as if it's going to be a hot summer and a cold winter, because it is easier to have too much in electricity than try to find electricity money when you're trying to pay the bill in December and you have to shuffle around and try to find where to reallocate it from. So gas price, always budget the gas prices high, because you're going to run out of fuel. But I would say that this year lots of people are going to have to bump up that fuel where they're paying fuel from, because it's going to be high the rest of the year as far as we can all see. So when costs increase, the budget's not going to be sufficient. So you need to put a cushion in those kinds of accounts anyway. In salary accounts, when your people get lots of overtime, cushion. You can't budget them for 40 hours a week if they often work 10 hours of overtime throughout the summer. You've got to budget a cushion in that salary account so that you can afford the overtime that you know you're going to get. How about if a situation completely changes and the appropriation account budget is insufficient to support the changes? So let me give you a scenario, because this kind of stuff really happens in the real world. So we have in the past in fake Buckeye Township always hired summer help at the cemetery. So we have seasonal workers that come in and mow and do the trimming. And this year, nobody wants the job. Nobody will show up to apply, and the cemetery needs mowed. So at the last meeting, the governing board says, we're going to get some pricing from some landscaping companies, and we're going to look at this at the next meeting. And they say, well, Trina, I want you to sit there and look good, because we're going to get the pricing for you. So remember, just because the situation is changing does not mean the fiscal officer is the one getting the pricing. So one of those governing board members is going to make some calls and get some hourly prices or flat rates that these reputable landscaping companies that are real companies and have real insurance, because if they bang the mower into a headstone, we're going to have to make a claim against their insurance. So you're going to hire, we're switching from employees, what we're budgeted, to a contractor. So I can't pay the contractor out of the salary account. You guys have to remember the appropriation accounts build your annual financial report, and it needs to be accurate. So we're not just going to spend from some vague account that doesn't mean anything. We're going to change the budget. So in this situation change, sometimes accounts are budgeted too low. I talked to a fiscal officer in early March, and they had already adopted appropriations for about half of what they needed, and she was already running out of appropriations. So we got a lot of new fiscal officers, and you're just hanging on by the seat of your pants. Keep hanging on because once you get through 1 year, it is easier. All right, so we're going to evaluate. So I'm not just going to go right to reallocation. I'm going to look at my appropriation status report and evaluate. And this is where we've got people. I'm trying to reallocate and it won't let me. It won't let you. Why? I don't know. So let's take a look. I just brought up the cemetery fund. And let's just forget that I just bought the mowers for our employees, because you're probably all laughing about that. Is I just put in extra money for the mower, and now we're going to, not have any employees. So I budgeted $50,000 like we always do, because we have a cemetery sexton. He's still working for us, but he doesn't do the mowing. He manages the funerals and things like that, but he doesn't do the mowing. So his salary is coming out of here, and I have to pay him the rest of the year. So far we have paid $9,000, and I need about $11,000 left. Here is my unencumbered balance. This means it hasn't been spent, and there's no PO on it. And because it's a salary account, of course there's no PO. So my unencumbered balance is what I'm looking at to see what can be reallocated. So I have to evaluate how much I have to leave behind in this account for the cemetery sexton. And remember, if I'm taking away $30,000 of appropriations for salary, that means my OPERS account has a cushion in it as well. I could take away from that, but I'm still going to be paying some OPERS. So evaluate it, and you might look down to our contracted services account. So here's our contracted service where the contractor is going to be paid from. So I have to evaluate this account as well. So I have an unencumbered balance of $9,500, but I have to think about what's it going to cost us, and we've got some quotes, and I need to make sure that this account code for contracted services will have a sufficient amount. So I'm going to look at this. We budgeted $15,000, and this is how much I have on a current PO. It's not spent yet. So let me explain. We have a tree trimmer that comes out and gets all the dead wood out of our trees at the cemetery, and I have opened the PO, and this is the amount that's left on it. He's out there working. We should have a bill on this soon. So this much is already set aside for the tree trimmer, and he comes once a year. So I know that unless we have an issue with another dead limb before the end of the year, I don't need to pay him more, but I would need to think of what other type of contracted service gets paid from this. So I might have to look at other reports. And on appropriation reports, you're not going to see this on the screen, but on the appropriation reports form, if you click the drop-down list, you can see that there is a appropriation payment register. So if you want to see who gets paid from this account code, you can look at appropriation payment register for last year to see who you've been paying from this account code. What does this money get used for? So you make sure you're not counting this as all unencumbered balance available to apply to the mowing, the landscaping folks. So I get all my numbers together. So folks that do a whole bunch of blanket certificates on all their account codes are going to see no unencumbered balance, which means it's all here in the unspent reserve for encumbrance. This is the unspent balance of purchase orders, and in the salary accounts it would represent employee withholdings. So if you've got blanket certificates on all your appropriations, you see no unencumbered balance to borrow from. There's no point in going to reallocate because you haven't got any. You would have to actually reduce one of your blanket certificates, which is a whole different step that you would do in the purchase order utility. Just reduce the purchase order on an account code where it has a cushion, and then you would be able to reallocate. So I find where I'm going to reallocate from. I can take it from here and here, and I've got the 9,500 that I'm going to put it in. Now I am informed and can go in to actually do the reallocation. And I'm going to do that at Accounting, Maintenance, Appropriation Budgets. So go into the appropriation budget form ready. So you have to look at that first. So if you choose the fund, click Reallocate, and in the Intrafund column, so we do have the official name here, but nobody looks at that, is where you're going to put the positives and the negatives. Now I want you to look, this is your unencumbered balance column, so if you went in here without looking at the appropriation status report, this is the column you have to pick from. You can't get the current year final appropriation, only the unencumbered balance. And you want to look down here at this grid. This grid, the last two items there, shows the current year final appropriation. What are your appropriations now? And then the revised current year final appropriation shows what it is after you enter figures in the intrafund column. And they have to be identical. All your pluses have to be equal to all your minuses because it has to net to zero. It cannot change the total appropriation. So there's my numbers. I took $30,000 away from the salaries, $1,000 away from OPERS, and added the $31,000 to the contracted services account. And again, I'm going to put an effective date. If this is inside my legal level of control, and I can't see how it could possibly be. I mean, to be honest with you, according to a high revised code, it's not. It's not in my legal level of control. So I know I'm going to get this ready for the upcoming meeting because they know they're going with a landscaper. Nobody's been hired, and I'm going to get this ready. So you can date this the meeting date. If you're reallocating within your legal level of control, you can date it today. But if it needs to be approved at a meeting, and the payment is going to be dated the date of the meeting, or the purchase order is going to be added at the meeting, then you want your effective date to be the meeting date. So you notice that because all of my negatives are equal to all of my positives, my current year final and my revised current year final are identical figures. I did not change the total appropriations. So ta-da, ta-da, and moving on. So I better look at my watch. Oh my goodness, we do not have time to cover this because I actually need 3 hours for this class, Tim. I know I jam-pack a lot of information and it means that we can't cover everything, but I'm going to go ahead and start this section and talk very fast. Okay, audit adjustments. Again, we have a video for this on our website, and so we don't have time. The video covers it. Errors are made in a prior year, posting receipts or payments to the wrong fund, and auditors have issued an adjustment, which all we can do is correct the cash balance. You can't ever go back into last year once it's closed. It can't be done. It's not supposed to be done. We can only correct the cash now. Now, there's an exception with the ARPA funds that is far more complicated than I can cover now. But if you posted your ARPA receipt to the general fund last year, it is supposed to be in a fund type of the coronavirus relief. So if you've got that issue, you want to give us a call on the support line. Audit adjustments are posted as fund balance adjustments, and they always impact the current year resources available. And that means you're going to do them by fund balance adjustments, and it's going to change your January 1st fund balance. Requires a request for an amended certificate because you have to tell the county auditor these fund balances have changed. All right, now here's my audit adjustments. I posted a receipt to the Road and Bridge Fund. I just grabbed the wrong account code and didn't see it, and it should have been posted to the general fund. So I have to do a positive adjustment to the general fund, which means it gets more money, but I have to do a negative adjustment to the Road and Bridge Fund, which means I'm going to have to evaluate this to see whether I'm going to get a compliance violation because my auditor wants these today in order to, I have to prove I did them today to close out the audit. So the first thing I have to do when I have a negative fund balance adjustment is evaluate my resources available. I'm going to take you back to this report, Budgetary Reports. And then you're going to go to the drop-down list and choose Comparison of Budget and Appropriated. It's a one-page report, so you're going to select all your funds, and we'll take a look at it. So we're going to evaluate it based on our audit adjustments that are needed. Okay, so I have to reduce my Road and Bridge Fund by $1,750. So the good news is I do at least have a January 1st fund balance of $1,750. Sometimes you don't have enough cash at the beginning of the year, and that means your fund is going to go negative. Huge. So you want to look at this to see how bad it's going to be. So I have enough cash. The problem is if I reduce this number by 1750, I'm going to get a compliance violation because we have appropriated almost all of our resources available. And you can see in my variance column, it shows me how much resources I can reduce without getting an amended certificate. And I only have 1326.13, and I need $1,750. So what has to happen? Well, if I post these audit adjustments with my budget right where it is, I am going to get a compliance violation in my software, and I will need to fix that before the end of year because a compliance violation in audit is a problem. So what would I have to do to not get a compliance violation? Well, no, and the auditor wants these today, but my meeting isn't until June. Well, if you call the support line, we're going to do this with you. We can tell from this report that your board has to reduce the appropriations in this fund so that when this number is reduced by 1750, you are not over appropriated. And that has to happen at an open public meeting. And you could have them call a special meeting, but the fact is we can date these in advance. So my variance needs to be 1760. I can't increase the resources available because that would be lying. I have to reduce appropriations. So you're going to prepare. The auditor wants the audit adjustments today. Today I can enter a supplemental appropriation, reducing appropriations to the Road and Bridge Fund with the effective date the next meeting date. The auditor that you're sending the audit adjustments to don't care what the date's on it. He just wants it today. And I know I'm going to put a resolution reducing appropriations to the Road and Bridge Fund on by $423.87. So that's the part you can't forget. At the next meeting, they're going to adopt that legislation. Don't forget it. And I can do the whole thing in my software now. And again, you have to have a good working relationship with your governing board or someone's going to have a hissy when you do these things. But most of you, I'm sure, have very good relations with your governing board. And if you make that auditor wait, he's going to be very, very unhappy. So I'm going to go to Accounting Maintenance, Appropriation Budgets. I'm going to check mark the Road and Bridge Fund and click Supplemental because Supplemental means I'm changing the total and it's 1 o'clock. So I'm going to do this very quickly. So I'm reducing appropriations from the Unencumbered Balance column in order to do the audit adjustments. I have put the effective date as at our next meeting, and I just stuck TBD, to be determined, in there. But actually, I didn't have to put anything in that field. I've got my appropriations. I'm going to save and close. Now, if I look back at my resources available, it would show me, again, that budgetary report. Oh my goodness, that's the slowest errors on the planet. All right, now that I have reduced appropriations, my variance is 1750. So now I can do the audit adjustments for 1750 without a compliance violation, but I cannot forget to get that resolution adopted. All right, so in the software, remember what I told you about fund balance adjustments? I'm getting an amended certificate, so I could email this report to the auditor to prove I did my audit adjustments because I did them dated 6/2. So I didn't want to take the time to do that. You can see they're posted 6/2. So my state auditor is happy. He can close his audit. And I'm going to send a letter to the county auditor after the meeting because I need the legislation reducing appropriations, right? So here's my adjusted fund balance. It's now reduced. My appropriations have now been reduced to the lower amended certificate I'm going to ask for. So I did things in the proper order so I wouldn't get a compliance violation. And here is the crazy letter I'm sending now to my county auditor. And remember, it's not dated till the day after the meeting because what if I forgot to get them to adopt that resolution? So enclosed is a copy. I have audit adjustments. I have enclosed a copy of resolution reducing appropriations to the Road and Bridge Fund. So first, I reduced appropriations. Then the audit adjustments were posted. I'm requesting an amended certificate, increasing the general fund, reducing the Road and Bridge Fund, and the reports that they like to have to prove it. Whether the governing board ever increases the general fund's appropriations would be happening at the next meeting. You know, do they really need that extra $1,750, or are they going to leave it unappropriated? Again, we have more in-depth training on our website, and I will be posting this video as well. All right, so I can take a look at the questions we've got. Thank you for your attention, and let's see what we've got in questions. Okay, there is a very involved question about coronavirus that I cannot deal with, because it was my understanding that coronavirus money had to be sent back by now. So I'm not sure I would give you the right information. On the handouts, could you not put in the notes section? It's almost impossible to read the pages. Sorry, that's just the standard handout for some videos froze. That means your internet dropped. There is nothing in UAN training about refinancing a loan to another company. That would be something you would want to talk to local government services about. So that would be a big deal, because it would involve the payoff of the original loan and the financing, new financing. So definitely call local government services to discuss how that would have to be answered. Tim did mention that 3 hours. He wants to know why I wanted 3 hours. I always need more time. And who can we call for questions? Well, you have to call local government about questions that you have about what fund, revenue, or appropriation account to post to, because that's just not UAN. We can tell you how to do it in the software, but you have to know what fund it belongs to. So definitely call us if you have your amended certificate and you can't get it to UAN to match. We can talk about how to evaluate that properly, because somebody at the beginning of the year, remember I said we got a whole lot of new fiscal officers, if somebody else certified your fund balances and carryover encumbrances to the county, they may have certified the wrong number. So we would evaluate your system based on the other sources, the taxes and other sources matching your UAN revenue budgets, and whether the unencumbered fund balance on your amended certificate matches the real numbers that happened at the close of the year. So give us a call if you're trying to get your amended certificate and UAN to match. We can evaluate that. And of course, your board adopted appropriations should be entered in the software exactly what. If you have an amended certificate and you can't get your software to match, you need to call UAN if so we can evaluate. Local government services would be who to call if you needed information on what fund. And yes, this course does qualify for training, but we can't ever put it on the website until the webinar is finished. So don't start telling me that you're trying to log into fiscal integrity training, self-reporting, and you can't find it, because the director of UAN will send them information over to the training department to add it after the webinar ends. So you will be able to self-report the training hours today, and it does qualify for that. So okay, so somebody is asking, so every grant we have received requires an amended certificate? I didn't say that. I said if you receive new money that is not already certified on your amended certificate, you would have to request an amended certificate to put it into your current year operating budget. So if you already budgeted grants because you got your award letter in time to include that, then it's already in your revenue budget on your amended certificate. So you have to evaluate when you get a grant, is it already certified? Is it already appropriated? If not, use that new money resource, the new money quick guide. And again, I'll post the new money quick guide, but I don't know if I'll be able to post the letters. They're really just like listening to me talk. Enclosed, please find this, that, or the other. So if we can post them on the website, we'll post them as companion documents. If not, you can always run the video to that section and do a screenshot of the sample letters. Okay, so I will stay for a little bit longer to see as questions come in. Again, UAN is your software support source. Local government services is all about what fund revenue appropriation account to use. The refinancing of loans was a very good question. Where's the new money quick guide on the website? It's not there yet. So I have this webinar, and then next Tuesday I have another webinar, and once both of them are finished, I'll produce both of those videos and we'll post them to our website. So this webinar is going to be posted on our website under training and accounting. Scroll all the way down to the bottom, and right now there's the 2018 version of this webinar. It will be replaced by the new one once I get this webinar produced. So it will be, and then the audit adjustments would be under accounting, and then scroll down to housekeeping, where you would find a section on audit adjustments and how to void a prior year item. Those housekeeping videos are just single subject videos. So I'm scrolling through the ones I've already answered. All right, that looks like we've covered it all. Again, always contact UAN if you've got software questions. If you're not sure whether we can answer the question, you call in, ask your question. We'll tell you whether you have to talk to local government services. Let me check. We got a question here. Okay, if you void a prior year warrant, wouldn't that also increase the unencumbered balance on the purchase order? Well, most of the time, when you're voiding a prior year warrant, that purchase order has been closed. So I cannot imagine why, if a payment was posted in a prior year, why would the purchase order still be open in the new year? So I don't think you're often going to have an effect of a purchase order being affected when you void a prior year warrant. Can you include the letters in the handout document? Well, I may be able to, I'll ask permission to post those sample letters on our website when the video is posted on our website. So it's possible. If not, you can always go to that video and advance it to where you see the letter and get a copy of it. So at UAN, we're not always allowed to put things out there that are outside our tiny box of what we're allowed to do. What you have to remember is your county auditor might have a form you have to fill out. So my letters aren't going to be of any use to you. And again, all you're doing is saying in your communication to the county, this is what I'm doing. Please send an amended certificate. Give them the information. Okay, no more questions that came in. Thank you so much for your attention. And many of you, I think I'll see back next week in the use of the budget software to prepare your 2023 budget. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to go ahead and close down the webinar.